cup at a time. Yeah, this is tea time. Yeah, making a difference. One cup at a time. Tea time. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time. Making a difference. One cup at a time. Tea time. Yeah. Tea time.
Well, welcome back to Tea Time with Miss Liz. That's right, we're here this evening and we have the incredible Lesley James in the studio. And we've been really excited about this Tea Time because we booked back in February. That's right, like 6 months ago. And I can't wait to have her on here and share about Last Wishes Consulting. It really is a topic that we all deal with, no matter who you are. Grief is something that affects us all. So we have the incredible Lesley James sitting in the back studio, and she's going to join us and share a good, strong cup of tea with all of you guys tonight. So before we get started, we're going to do all the good stuff. We're going to do disclaimers and a little bio, and then we're going to get Lesley in here. We're going to spill a good, strong TEA with all of you guys tonight on Tea Time with Miss Liz. So be sure to share this Tea Time, get it out there, and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you will be notified for all Tea Times going live, as we are live now on this channel. So, disclaimer for Miss Liz's live Tea Time shows. Miss Liz, myself, is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith. However, may bring forward dialogues and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the giving time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment in taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussion for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It's significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection, and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in tonight's show in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you find that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect your wishes and will see you at a later show at a later date and time. Again, all Tea Time shows are hosted on Thursday, 10, 3, and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if it's not a Thursday, it's a rescheduled Tea Time, and that will be done on a Monday and a Tuesday. So a little bit on Lesley James. Lesley James is a compassionate and end-of-life planner, educator, author, speaker, and founder of Last Wishes Consulting. She became a licensed Willow EOL educator and offers a variety of workshops to a global community. As a licensed funeral pre-planner with the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, she is honored to serve families in the province with pre-arrangements and aftercare. She's a licensed Willow EOL educator, licensed funeral pre-planner with BAO Independent Associate PPLSI, Grief Doula Certificate, IDLM, co-author Under Your Light, Volume 1, and co-author of Bold Spirit, Caring for the Dying. For more on Lesley's bio. You can check it out on Miss Liz's Facebook page. And I'm going to get Lesley in here and I'm going to grab a cup of tea because my throat is a little itchy. So, welcome, Lesley.
Good evening, Miss Liz. How are you? Thank you for that warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here with you. I have my special cup of tea as well in my cup that my daughter and my son gifted me on my coaster from Jamaica, and so I'm all set.
Well, we're bringing Canada and Jamaica in tonight, right? So it's like this afternoon. I told Brenda I get to travel to Jamaica tonight with my guests. Yeah. So, Lesley, it's been a couple of months since we booked this tea time, and we have so much in common. So, if you'd like to share with the audience and listeners out there, what do we have in common?
Absolutely. I just can't believe I've been anticipating this date for so long. So, we're both touched by grief and loss, first of all. We'll get into that. We are both authors, co-authors. We're both about educating and advocating for others. My favorite beverage is tea. And I am living here in Ontario since 1976 when I immigrated to Canada with my family.
Wow. So you've been here for quite a while. So how old were you when you moved to Canada?
Yeah, I was 9. I was 9. So yeah, there was just a lot of political unrest. And so we made just outside of Toronto our home. And basically I've lived in Markham, Ontario, which is just north of Toronto. I've lived in Markham since 1999. And I became an end-of-life doula. EOL stands for end of life. So EOL is just the short form for end of life. So I have a degree in economics and my whole world got turned upside down. And this is a calling for me. So I left a corporate job and I went and I was drawn to do studies in hospice and funeral pre-planning, bereavement, grief, loss, death, dying. And I became an end-of-life doula and also a grief doula. A lot of people might not know what the word doula is. And did you want me to elaborate on that?
Yeah, please.
So
because a lot of people might not know what a grief doula is compared to a birth doula.
Exactly. And there are so many different types of doula. Doula is the term, it's a Greek term, and it means one who serves or helps. So most people, you're right, have heard of a birth doula that helps the mom and the family and the newborn as they enter the world. So a death doula or an end-of-life doula helps the person who's dying and their family as they are transitioning. But also, a lot has to do with the preparation for death, talking about death, grief literacy, death education, end-of-life planning, and that's where I come in. An end-of-life doula or death doula in Canada and most of North America is not regulated yet. I'm hoping one day it will be, but right now there are different, everyone brings different skills to the role. So I'm not doing any bedside. There are end-of-life doulas who will do bedside vigiling and maybe some personal care. I'm not doing that. I'm more on the practical and spiritual and emotional support side of things.
So Lesley, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, so there are, doulas, there are grief, and then I was drawn to grief. So I did a certificate program with International Doula Life Movement, IDLM, and I'm a grief doula as well. And there are pet doulas, there are cancer doulas. So doula is just a Greek term. And the most common one that people have heard of is a birth doula, but end-of-life doula, death doula. I prefer end-of-life doula. It's a little bit softer, but just sadly, we live in a death-fearing society. So, but death doula, end-of-life doula, grief doula, that's who I am.
Well, you bring a good point, Lesley. The fear of death. Why are people so afraid of death? We should be born knowing that we're going to pass, right? Like, why is the fear there?
And it's not just It's not every culture. I just find in Western society, for the most part, and not everyone, it all, it's 100 years ago or more than 100 years ago, people used to die at home. The living room was the room at the front of the house. It was kind of like a parlor, and there were home funerals, which are coming back. But society is just, grief is love. So the more deeply you love and the loss of someone, whether it's, I kind of talk about the 3 Ps, whether it's a person, okay, person, you lose someone in your life dies, pregnancy and child loss, and pet loss. Those are really difficult. But there's other kinds of losses too, and I'm going to touch a bit about that, if I may, when we get through this conversation. But yes, this is my role, and many end-of-life doulas and people in the bereavement sector, is to empower people to have the conversation. There are decks of cards that can embrace it. There are, I'm also Willow EOL, or Willow End-of-Life Educator and Planner. And I host workshops globally. There's 10 different workshops that I host. I just got through a whole series on that on Eventbrite. And one of them is how to stop procrastinating with end-of-life planning. There's 5-minute legacy love letter. There departure directions. What are your last wishes? And that's why I founded, Last Wishes Consulting, to bring education to the public. I'm a licensed pre-planning advisor for funerals in the province of Ontario. So I just want to add to your disclaimer, and I like your disclaimer, but I do not provide medical advice, financial advice, or legal advice. But I'll talk a bit about PPLSI, which is Pre-Planning Legal Services, Inc. And if anyone's interested in getting their will done, it's such an important document. Your wills, your power of attorney for personal care, power of attorney for property. I can point you in the right direction for that.
Well, and the reason that we have these disclaimers is because a lot of people, they'll take it as an offense if there's no disclaimer, like you didn't warn me, you didn't give me up, and I always try to give trigger warnings or anything like that, especially when we're talking about the heavier subjects like grief. For some reason, grief is a topic that scares a lot of people. It traumatizes a lot of people. It brings up a lot of emotions. We talked about that even before we went live. You had asked if it was okay to talk about certain things. I'm okay with my grief. But a couple of years ago, I was not okay with my grief. I was going through the complicated grief. Little things would set me off, and I'd be like, no, I can't do that. I'm gonna just avoid that. I don't want to talk about it. I'm just gonna avoid it. It's gonna go away. But we all know grief doesn't go away. It's there, and we have to deal with it. So, but for the listeners out there and viewers that are listening and that will listen to the replay later, we're here to bring you the education and to bring you the awareness that there are services out there. Myself, I didn't even know there was bereaved services out there until I lost my father in 2016. I never knew of any services before that. And that's my attachment with bereaved families, is I just went for a walk when my dad died, and I found this place, and I was like, what is that? Like, what kind of service is that? And then I went home and I asked my spouse, and he's like, well, that's for people who lost somebody. And I'm like, well, I just lost my dad, so that's what I need. So, and that's how I came upon, the moving and finding bereaved families. But Lesley, how did you find bereaved families?
So a dear friend of mine died in 2018. Actually, 2 of my friends died, one in 2016 and one in 2018. My girlfriend and tennis partner, she was only 49. And 2 years later, or actually 13 months later, my other friend, I had attended high school with him. We were friends, and he died at the age of 51. And ironically, where they both live, there was no hospice. They had been sick for quite some time, number of years. And they ended up, again, coincidentally, ironically, dying at the same hospital. And I was there with their families. And when they died, there were similar situations with teenage daughters and aging parents and siblings with busy lives of their own. And no conversation had been had with what their last wishes were. So I was grieving. I didn't know what to do. I started Googling. I was able to share a chapter in a book called Bold Spirit, Caring for the Dying. I wrote a chapter called Serenity and Mindfulness, and I was grieving, and it was a bit of a complicated grief because of the relationship. A lot of people were saying, well, why are you, this is not a parent or a child or a spouse. Why are you grieving so much? But grief is very personal, and I will never judge someone's grief. And I just started Googling and writing. I found very therapeutic to write about my grief. It took some time. I'm very okay talking about it now, but you're right. 4 or 5 years ago, I couldn't get out of bed. Grief was just so heavy. And I have studied Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler, Megan Devine. There's so many tools, resources, podcasts, books. And then I was drawn to become a Willow end-of-life educator and planner, and learning about that there are grief expressive arts therapy to cope with your grief and to talk about your grief. And yes, Bereaved Families of Ontario, another BFO. I was, of course, this was during COVID. I studied through them, took an intensive several week-long program to become a volunteer with BFO, to become a group grief support volunteer with BFO, or Bereaved Families of Ontario. This was on Zoom. I would support people in group for mixed loss and partner loss. Very tender. I knew my limits were, and I did not do any child loss. That's not my specialty. So I did that for about a year, on top of establishing Last Wishes Consulting and hosting Willow end-of-life workshops on Zoom.
Well, and with bereaved families, I found that it helped me understand why I was so angry at my dad. And then once I did the support group for a loss of a parent, I realized that it was complicated grief. And complicated grief is hard because it's a grief that a lot of people would really judge fast and say, well, why are you grieving that? That's not connected. That wasn't, because for me, it was my stillborn daughter that I grieved. This was a child that was never born. So why are you grieving a child that was never born? So there was a lot of that shame and guilt. And why am I feeling these way? Why am I angry at my dad? There was a lot of complicated grief. And when we do complicated grief, it is hard because right away people were saying, well, that's not a family member. That's not somebody close to you. So why are you grieving that person? And I always tell everyone, when I worked with bereaved families for 3 years on the board, is nobody should be shooting on us, and nobody should be questioning why we're grieving something, whether it's a pet, a building, a home, a child, a parent. Nobody should question us. We're hurting.
Absolutely.
And let us express ourselves and let us get the support that we need, And bereaved families has saved my life in many, many ways. It gave me a voice to speak out about grief because I was ashamed of my grief. I was scared of my grief, but I understood through the support system of bereaved families that I could share, and it was okay to share, So is that what you got from bereaved families as well?
Yes. So it was very helpful, and I just found that helping others in a non-judgmental space, I was able to bring active listening to the role, even though it was a volunteer role, and even though it was on Zoom. There were really individuals where for anything from death by suicide. Some had lost both parents or close relatives to COVID, and some had lost pets, some had lost their partners. So it was a wide variety of, there's so many different types of grief and loss and the isolation. So I'm very familiar with bringing comfort and peace of mind and active listening in a non-judgmental space. And I just want to acknowledge, Miss Liz, that I have not lost a parent. I have not lost a child. And I want to just acknowledge and share warmth from my heart as you carry your grief. Your grief right now might be a lot, you've grown around it, right? But you will always carry it. So I'm just acknowledging that. And yes, the other role that I volunteer at for over 3 years is with Bereavement Ontario Network. So I've been a volunteer with York region, Dufferin region, and Simcoe region. And the role is shifting a bit to a communications role where I'll be teaming up with another member. So it's just a wonderful network to be part of, along with the Death Doula Ontario Network that I'm a member of. So many death doulas, end-of-life doulas, educators in the end-of-life space that want to ease the burden. And I use the word ease as an acronym. So empower others to have the conversation is the E. A, advocate for a person who's dying, that there are options, right? A lot of people want to die at home today. You don't have to die in hospital. If you want to die in hospital, that might, that's an option. There's hospice. I'm an advocate and volunteer for hospice as well. So the S is support. I support individuals and their families through their end-of-life planning. And the E is educate. It's almost like teaching educational awareness. So we have a lot of common, and today is my 2-year anniversary. I didn't even know this when I booked it, but it just showed up in a memory on social media that I went back to school in my 50s and got my funeral pre-planning license with the Bereavement Authority of Ontario. So the BAO, anything to do with funerals, transfer services, cemeteries, anything to do with death care in the province of Ontario, and pre-planning. I'm licensed to help anybody and provide information on pre-planning, pre-paying, pre-arranging your funeral in the province of Ontario. And I'm very knowledgeable on that.
Well, Lesley, I really wanted to have you on Teatime because when I did research on you, I found all these incredible organizations that you're a part of that I never even knew existed. And that's the reason why we do Teatime, is to bring awareness to these services that are out there. If we don't bring the awareness, how do people find them? And I was really amazed on how many incredible organizations are out there that you're a part of. And the education is out there. The support is out there, So how did you find all of these incredible services?
Again, when I took a course in March of 2020, it was June of 2020. A lot happened at the beginning of 2020 when COVID started, and I took a course, end-of-life doula course through Douglas College. Of course, it was virtual. And then I found Olga Nikolaev with the Death Doula Ontario Network. I've been a member since June of 2020. And then I found BON, or Bereavement Ontario Network. I found BFO. There's just connections. And that's one of my strong things that I talk about is community.
Yeah.
Yes, grief community. I may have lost some friends, my family. At the beginning when I said, well, I'm going to found Last Wishes Consulting, and I'm just talking about death, and I'm pre-planning my funeral, and I'm showing my kids what I've done. And they were a bit scared, I will say. But now they just get it. because I looked at my son and daughter and I said, so I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm going to shift gears a bit because a lot of this has to do. Yes, I spoke about my two friends who died, and there was loss. But you know, I was married. You know, when you get married, you think it's going to be forever, and then something happened, and so I was divorced. I'm divorced. I'm happily divorced now. I'm very, very good, amicable relationship. I'm very blessed for that. And but that was in the beginning. That was a huge loss. I remember, you know, I remember going to the doctor because my chest was hurting me, and I couldn't breathe, and I really thought something medically was wrong with me. But he checked me all out and everything, and apart, you know. But he says, you have heartache, right? So that was a huge loss. Then I was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease called Addison's disease. I've had it for 23 years. I live with chronic pain, with chronic, multiple chronic conditions. And so now I'm an advocate for people with invisible illnesses, with chronic conditions and rare diseases, and grief and disability is something that I am venturing to study because we don't realize, and I want to educate people on what it is to live with a disability. So there's that loss. Then a few years, when my son was 8 years old, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and no history of diabetes on either side of our family. No relative, no grandparent. I remember, you know, he was 8 years old. We did his, you know, it just came out of the blue. It literally came out of the blue. And I will just share this. I'm not giving any medical advice here, but excess thirst and frequent urination are two of the key symptoms. Anyway, through all these doctors, and it's like grief. One of the things, I was in such denial. I remember putting 2 hours. We were called to go to the hospital, and I was working. His dad was working. We paid 2 hours for parking. We said, okay, let's get them to redo the test because it's a mistake. It's obviously a mistake. My son does not have type 1 diabetes, you know, so, but here we are. And, you know, that was, I went through a lot of guilt and blame. I had a stressful time. I didn't have a stressful pregnancy. He was very healthy when he was born, but just job wise, a lot of things were going on in my life, in my world at that time. New job, I had to move, new city. And I think it was just a very stressful time. And that's when I got diagnosed with Addison's disease as well. So the diagnosis, the divorce, the loss of health of child, and then it's, you know, loss of close friends and loss of youth. I'll just say it, you know, going through menopause. It's nobody wants to talk about it because
right.
We don't want to, you're getting old, and we don't want to, I want to be clear. My grandmother lived to 100 years old. I wish everyone could live for as long as they could without pain and without suffering.
Yeah.
But one of the things is the reality of our mortality. And I saw what happened with my two friends not having the conversation with their families. And then I had two medical adrenal crisis. That's with my Addison's disease. So from my home, where I am now, I had to call EMS, Emergency Medical Services, 911 from my home because I had a crisis, one in 2014 and one in 2017. And I was taken to hospital by ambulance, and my children, my parents, my sisters witnessed that. And I realized I didn't have anything in order. I didn't have my affairs in order. Nobody, passwords, my last wishes. So it was between 2016, when my girlfriend Michelle died, between 2017 of my second adrenal crisis, and 2018 when my friend Greg died. those were very pivotal moments for me that said, okay, what is my purpose?
Yeah.
And my purpose is an end-of-life educator and planner. And I want people to talk about it. And just like sex, talking about sex is not going to make you pregnant, right?
Everybody does it. Like, yeah.
It's actually, that movement came out. I remember it was in, and it's not, it actually promoted people to have safe sex, talking about sex, right?
Yep.
And talking about death. Really, there can be better dying experiences for all if we plan for it and have the conversation. Over 55% of Canadian, on the practical side, more than half, way more than half. It's probably closer to 70. But the majority of Canadians do not have their wills. And I will say this number, I've studied it, it's pretty much a global number. So whether it's the US or in the Europe or UK, it's more than half, and everyone needs a will. And that's really what I'm here to have the conversation, as well as, it could be from anything from organ donation, or do you know about hospice, right? Hospice is not a death sentence. It's actually, really wish people who are dying and palliative care, could be given the option for hospice. I had a lot sooner. Yeah. I have a dear friend who, in her final days, her family, and this is in Ontario, her dog was able to lie on the foot of her bed in hospice and come visit. And, the whole family, it's like a bedroom setup. There's no machines beeping, and, it was just like a bedroom setup. And it was just such a beautiful, beautiful way to go. And so have an exit plan, have the conversation, and write your letters. Tell your people now, today, how much they mean to you, how much you appreciate them, how much you love them.
Well, and I really appreciate you, Lesley, talking about your divorce and your son's health and all of that. And Addison, that's something else we have in common, because I have a cousin who was diagnosed with Addison at the age of, I think he was 21. And you're the second person that I know of that has Addison's disease. It's not a really out there illness. Like it really is an invisible illness. They were traveling with my cousin, and my cousin just could not breathe. They rushed him to the hospital. His color changed. He was having trouble. And then they found out he had Addison's disease. And then he was still a young boy. So he had to, like, if he wanted kids in the future, he had to make decisions, If anybody would like to know more about Addison's disease, please please reach out to Lesley. Like I said, Lesley, you're the second person that I know of that has it. My cousin has it. He talks about it a bit, but he doesn't really know about it or speak about it, or maybe he's trying to understand it himself. So,
and I've had Addison's disease for 23 years. Okay, and it's only recently, because it's that whole judgment thing, right?
Yep.
And I don't, I was working full time, very, I had hard times, right, balancing bringing up young kids, marriage. I had a long commute, very stressful. So Addison's disease is a stress disorder. And basically autoimmune means something in your body. So in my case, my own body attacked my adrenal glands, which are little walnut-sized glands that sit on top of your kidneys. I didn't even know anything about adrenal glands, but my body does not produce cortisol. And cortisol is the stress hormone, and it impacts hundreds of things in the body. So this is the whole end-of-life planning as well, right? And yes, now it used to be 1 in 100,000 people diagnosed with Addison's. I think it's, according to the Canadian Addison Society, which I'm a member of, there are now, it's closer to six people per 100,000 in Canada. Anyway, that's how rare it is. So yeah. I hope your cousin is okay. But yeah, I never talked about it because Two things. I didn't want anybody feeling sorry for me.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Right? But I wanted compassion and understanding. And some people still don't understand. So I have to plan. There's somebody who came up with the spoon theory. I'm a spoonie, or a zebra. I'm rare. I'm proud to be rare. I can't do two things like like I'll do this and I'll be sleeping, right?
I'm done for the day. That's it.
And I can't, like, if I have a birthday party or there's a celebration, a family thing, or I want to do something on the weekend, that's my one thing, and then the next day I have to rest. So my whole world is around decreasing the stress, avoiding the mess, and reducing the distress. So in end of life. So stress, mess, distress. I don't want anybody to have any of that. And when I talk about, so we talk about stress. Death can be stressful. Grief can be stressful, loss. But if we talk about it, and what your loved one wanted, what are their last wishes? Have the conversation. It's not morbid. I can guarantee you it is not morbid. It's actually one of the best things that you can give to your loved one is talking about it and planning for it. The other thing is mess, right? It could be, right now I'm actually decluttering. There's this thing called Swedish death cleaning. I'm getting rid of all my, paper, I'm filing, I'm getting organized, I'm donating, I'm selling, I'm slowly downsizing. Yes, I have a lot of books. I like to collect books. I like to read books. A lot of them are grief. And then I got a little free library. I don't know if you've heard of that, but right outside my house, I have one of those little free libraries, and I'll be sneaking once a month a book on grief in there, because that's part of how I educate my community. I didn't want to overwhelm the whole community. I wanted to call it Lesley's Grief Library, but I said, okay, not everybody is as, embracing this as me, but that's part of the whole grief literacy. So that's really who I am. And it's all about family, right? The F is for forgiveness. A is for added stress. M is for the mess. I is the inconceivable emptiness and talk about legacy. So you don't have that, right? L is the legal, right? And get your affairs in order. Your everyone needs a will, power of attorney for personal care. That's how you want to be, and it could even not even to do with dying, but if I had a stroke, who is going to have authority in how to take care of my body? And same with the power of attorney. We call it power of attorney for property in the province of Ontario. I've assigned someone to take care of my finances if I am unable to speak about that. And then the Y is your distress, like your mental health. This will ease the stress and the burden on your loved ones if you just have the conversation.
And I think it's really deeply important that we bring this topic to the table, because when people pass, if we're talking about it before they pass, we're preparing ourselves. It doesn't mean that the grief won't be as hard. It just means that you're prepared. It's just like going to a job interview. You prepare yourself. You're going to a new school. You prepare yourself. We're preparing ourselves for death because it's going to happen to all of us. We're all born and we're all going to die, and we shouldn't be afraid of death. We should have the open conversation over the table. What would you like if something would happen to you? And we have people that are dying at any age. So we can't just say when you're older or that. There's children that are passing. What would they like for their last wish? And I really love that your consulting business is called Last Wishes, because for me it was a dandelion. That's why I put it in the video, is when some see that as a weed, but sometimes people see death as a weed as well. So if we look at it in a different perspective and we blow it and we let it open, we can see the beauty in death.
Oh, your words are beautiful, and it's interesting that I was debating on what background to use, and I'm going to have you hopefully as a guest on my Grief Lounge with Lesley. I've just started, I've only had one episode so far, but I have a background with the dandelion blowing in the wind. So we think so much alike, and it's gonna be awesome if you could be a guest on my Grief Lounge with Lesley. I do want to just hope your cousin is okay. Back to the Addisons. 23 years, I never really talked about it until an opportunity came up for me to co-author a chapter in my second book. And this is called Uncover Your Light, Empowering Stories of Hope and Resilience. So this came out last October, just after Thanksgiving, and it's with 19 other women sharing their stories. And I decided, you know what, it was time. It was time for me to share my story so I can help others, because I firmly believe that sharing our stories of invisible illnesses empowers us to recognize that we are not alone. Okay. And I didn't want any judgment, employment, or discriminate. It would be discrimination if an employee were to discriminate of someone. But I said, you know what, it's time for me to share my story, because if somebody invites me to play, my favorite sport, tennis, I have to I have to really plan for that, right?
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of, I used to play all the time, but now I have to plan for everything. I have to plan everything. Heat, I have to plan for. Any kind of event that might not be stressful for other people, I have to plan for. So I wrote a chapter called From Pain to Purpose, and again, talk about, the pain I'm in, and now my purpose as an end-of-life educator and planner, and founding Last Wishes Consulting. I really have found my calling as an empath.
Well, and I think sometimes our griefs put us on a journey, right? That we might have not ever seen had we not lost someone. That was what happened to me when my dad passed. I didn't know about bereaved families. And once I did the support groups and did the support group for my daughter and all of that, I was like, I want to know more. I want to know how I can help my community. I want to understand grief more. So how do you do that? You get involved. You volunteer your time. A lot of these services, you can volunteer your time. You can go in, you can talk, and you can get all the different people out there that don't know about the services. Like, there's a lot of things that I learned about bereaved families once I found them. But before I didn't even know there were services. Hospice, I never even knew about hospice until 2016. And I was like, wow. Oh no, it was 2015 when I found out about hospice, because I started doing events for hospice, jamming for hospice. And I didn't even know what hospice was. I was like, what is this name? What is this place? Like, is that where people, like, where do people go? Like, what kind of people go there? Like, it's a nice name, hospice. It sounds calming and relaxing, but I never even knew what hospice was until I got involved with it. And then I found out that it was very a peaceful environment. It's like you said, Lesley, it's like you said, like, there's no beeping machines. There's no, it's very open and very homey. It's like going in your bedroom and just sitting and watching TV, bringing your pets in, reading a book, do some coloring, uh,
And I will add to that there are typically, there's different kinds of hospice. So the hospice that we've sort of been talking about up until now has beds. Some are 5-bed, 6-bed, 10-bed hospices in various cities around the world. And we need more hospice. Usually
Yes.
they're government funding and a small amount, but they typically rely on fundraising and donations. Where I live in the city of Markham, which is just north of Toronto, Canada, the hospice I volunteer for is called Evergreen Hospice. And the bereavement support, I found Evergreen Hospice when my mother-in-law died in hospice in a different city in west of Toronto. It was a little too far for us to go, but Hospice, yes, other than the physical space, hospice, it could be a building with beds, but hospice is also offered to and brings the services to people's homes. So where I live, there are no beds. We're hoping one day that there's a building with beds that people can go to. I would love to die there. But right now I'm planning to die in my home. But you know what? Don't know. But it's the bereavement support. So I've volunteered with hospice doing bereavement support, and it's just phenomenal. Again, they have group support, and it's just fundraising. Such, Hike for Hospice is a big thing in the month of May. It's an incredible opportunity.
And for anybody that wants to get any information on these services, Lesley, what's the best way to find them?
So, just if you just Google hospice and then your city, you'll be able to find them. We can, if anybody is in Ontario and needs help with that, I can certainly look for you, help you. But it's typically, there's Canadian Hospice Association, there's national associations, but it's pretty much more and more are being built. And we've just got to get the word out that this is an option for people at end of life.
And I think people are starting to talk about death. I think when we had to stay at home and we had to really look at family life, and when we were locked down, we had to find different services. We Googled more, we used the services more. A lot of the virtual events that were being given during that time. So during that time, there was a lot of people that were stuck at home. So a lot of people did die at home. They did, they couldn't go to the hospital, or the hospital would take them, and then the family wasn't able to say their goodbyes that way. So how do you feel since COVID has passed and the pandemic has passed? How do you feel, Lesley, on the services now for bereavement?
Oh, I think they have just, exponentially, they were good and great before, but I firmly believe that it brought out, the pandemic, COVID, and the more deaths that we're having has definitely empowered people to have the conversation and realize that there are these incredible resources like hospice, and that you don't need to go it alone. There's so many people volunteering with hospice. If anybody's looking for a place to donate, they rely heavily on fundraising. But yeah, grief support in general, whether it's a bereavement network, an organization, it is needed for all kinds of loss. Definitely the loss of life, bereavement. Hopefully one day there will be workplaces that can give, I'm advocating for people to have more than just 3 days time off when your loved one has died. So I think we still have a long way to go, but it's definitely improved from what it was before COVID.
So we have a question here. What is green burials?
I'm glad you asked that. So green burials is just a more environmentally friendly option. Now, depending on whether you live in a city or whether you live, close to me, because I live in a city, there are hybrid cemeteries which have sections of a cemetery that you could have a green burial. And there's restrictions on what can be allowed. For example, no embalming of the body isn't allowed. Sometimes there is a wicker casket or a shroud that is used, and the decedent is placed into the ground. There would be probably wildflowers growing. The grass is not mowed. It's just a very natural burial, final resting place. There would be no tombstones or gravestones allowed, no markers. You could have maybe a plaque nearby or a natural stone. And it is definitely becoming more and more popular for example, in Niagara Falls, in different parts of Ontario, and definitely in British Columbia. I'm not sure where the person who put the post is, but it is definitely, I love the idea of a green burial. There's also, it's not just, and that's what I do in my end of life education with Willow and with Last Wishes Consulting, is it's not just about burial and cremation. There are so many more options. In Ontario, probably over 70% of people now are choosing cremation, and that's the typical flamed cremation that we think about. But there's also aquamation, which is water cremation. And yep, I've investigated it, and it is legal in some provinces. It's not yet legal in British Columbia, but there are places in Ontario that and if you go to my website, there is a podcast. You scroll down, lastwishesconsulting.com. I have a interview, What is Aquamation, from a couple of years ago. It's also called alkaline hydrolysis is the technical name for it. Aquamation, water cremation. So there's so many different options. I don't want to take up, I know we're coming close to the end.
No, because I think it's important that people know that there's these services out there, because, we've come a long way from coffins and, and cremation. There's so many different things. There's like glass blowing with ashes. There's, planting a tree.
Yes, and scattering has become very popular as well in the province of Ontario. You can scatter cremated remains on Crown land. So again, this is my the pre-planning funeral, what I learned so much. I was a pallbearer at my grandmother's funeral. So again, I think I mentioned she lived to 100. It's mostly women in our family. And when she died, there were 6 granddaughters who lived in Toronto. Some were still out of the country. And my dad, as his mom, said, I would love if her 6 granddaughters who are here be the pallbearers. And I think the church and the cemetery thought we were a little bit crazy because even though she probably weighed less than 100 by that point, that casket was heavy. But you know what? She was such a strong woman in our lives, and we lowered her into the ground. And this is where my final resting place will be, because I've done the research, and I know that I'll be the first in my family that is not going to have a traditional burial. And it's okay to continue traditions. Traditions, I believe in, they're very important. But if it's also okay to start new traditions, right?
Right.
So just based on my knowledge, and I had the conversation with my children, I said, I'm planning to have my cremated remains, hopefully aquamation. Would you like them? And they said, no offense, Mom, we love you, but we don't want to lug this urn around, right? So we talk it's an important conversation. But so I said, okay, right, I'm going to make my own plans, and I've contacted the cemetery, and I've given them all the documentation, because my name now, James, I kept my married name, and it's not what my maiden name is. I had to give 3 pieces of documents to show that I'm related to my grandmother. So when the time comes, they can open up the grave, and I'll be added and reunited with my grandmother there. So there's just a lot of things that we can discover over tea times like this, right?
Right. We're almost at the hour. So before we get to the hour, I do want to get your tea, Lesley. So what tea would you give me if I ask you what your TEA is?
So my tea is trauma and grief informed. I know that's a big tea, but medical trauma. I also will have talked about beyond trauma. I spoke at a global conference in March, and it's how to move beyond trauma. And trauma comes in different forms. There's hundreds, probably thousands of different kinds of trauma, but being informed so that we can support others, and being, informed about the different types of grief and how what we can do in our different levels or areas or types of grief is so important. And do you want the E?
I want the E and the A. What do you got
Okay,
for
so
me?
E is obviously end of life education. I'm an end of life educator and planner. So E is EOL, or end of life education. And the A is advance, without the D, advance care planning. So this is planning that we do in advance. Some places call it medical directives, but in Ontario, we call it advanced care planning. And you can just look up Advanced Care Planning Ontario or connect with me. I can help you get your advanced care plan in place so that others, if something were to happen to you, even, dementia is so prevalent now. So whatever the medical condition or end of life condition, if you're unable to speak for you, who can speak for you? Who is your substitute decision maker, right? So that is what that conversation is about.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that strong T. Now, I want to get to the 3 because I'm all about 3, because the TEA is 3. And I see 3 colored hearts behind you.
Oh,
Now, I
yes.
want to talk about those before we wrap up. So can you share a little bit on why those colors and what they're for?
Thank you so much for asking, Miss Liz. So for those just tuning in, this is my coaster from Jamaica. I was born in Jamaica. Yes, the flag is green and yellow and black, but typically red, gold, and green is, reggae, and that's a vibrant color. I love bright colors, red, gold, and green. So the red represents love, of course, right? The heart with red, yellow. So when I did Willow, let me back up. When I reached out to Willow, I did a course on what are my core values from a list of 50 different words. And I realized I didn't have my core values established. So I wanted to set my core values. And 3 words that kept coming up when I dealt with people working with their grief and end of life were grief, fear, and pain. And I said, okay, what is Lesley about, and how can I help others with their grief, their fear, and their pain? So the L is love. That is one of my core values. The the W is wisdom. Knowledge is power. Wisdom is empowering. And the C is comfort. So red, gold, and green, love, wisdom, comfort. And I always sign off my emails with sending love, sharing wisdom, and offering comfort, because I firmly believe that love softens grief, that wisdom embraces fear, and that comfort soothes pain.
I think it's really deeply important bringing those colors in, talking about Jamaica. We took a trip to Jamaica tonight with Lesley. She's been in Canada since 9, but she still was born in Jamaica. So we went to Jamaica Lesley style, and we really have to just look at different things in different perspectives, different eyes. It's just like that dandelion. Don't look at it as a weed, look at it as a wish, the last wish, the end of life. And that's what Lesley talked about tonight on Tea Time. So I really want to thank you, Lesley, for sharing all the wisdom and the comfort and the love that you brought to the table tonight. It really is empowering. You give hope and inspiration to the people out there that are maybe afraid of it. So let's take the fear out of it, and let's start talking about death in a new way. Let's start talking about it with tea. Grab a tea and get the love, the comfort, and the wisdom out there. And we all can make a difference when we serve one another. So I want to thank you, Lesley, for joining. I want to thank all of the supporters that joined in. And for all the viewers that listen to the replay, please push #replay. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. If you have any questions and you'd like to reach Lesley, you can reach her at her website at lastwishesconsulting.com. Again, Lesley, thank you so much for sitting and having tea with me and having so much similarities in our stories. It really, truly is an honor. I will see everybody not next week, but the week after, because Miss Liz is going on vacation. So I will be back on July 27th with 3 strong men. We did 3 strong women today. And when I end the month of July, we're going to do 3 strong men. And that's just how we roll. We equal it on both sides. So I want to thank everybody, and I will see you on July 27th at 10 a.m., 3 p.m., and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with a new cup of TEA for you.
Thank you so much, Miss Liz. It was a delight to be a guest on your Tea Time.
Well, thank you so much.